we are getting started. Thank you so much for joining us. If someone is joining us online, thank you for tuning in. I'm Filippo from the Office for Digital Emerging Technologies. This event, Building the Commons, Creating and Maintaining Digital Public Goods, is hosted by the UN Office for Digital Emerging Technologies with Wikimedia Foundation, Estonia, and France. I encourage you, to those of you around the room, to move forward. You will find the program on your desk and also a QR code announcing the UN Open Source Week 2026. We had over 1,000 people last year, and we hope to have many more in 2026. The program today, as we are waiting for all the speakers to arrive, we'll have opening remarks from the Undersecretary General and Special Envoy Amandeep Gill. Then we'll hear from Nandini and Armando some success stories of digital public goods around the world, and then we'll move into a panel discussion. Now, as we are starting to this, when we were asking for a room, the option was either to have a room for 15 people or for 400. But ideally, we want to keep this as conversational as possible. So we would encourage all of you to request for the floor, to take the floor, and again, to comment and share your experience. Actually, as I don't see USG yet, maybe we can actually start from the application. Maybe Armando, who just arrived in the building, if we can ask you to take the floor. I'll give you yes. And for introduction, we will have Armando Guio Española, is the Executive Director of the Global Network of Internet and Society Centers. He will explain better what it is, a network of over 100 academic institutions. And after his intervention, it will be Nandini Chami. She is the Deputy Director of IT for Change. And without further ado, Armando, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think you can hear me for sure. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be able to show my slides, or...
We'll share the slides after, but we will not, unfortunately, be able to project.
No worries. No, that's perfectly fine. So, as you will see, and you will be able to see on the slides, I'm the Executive Director of the Global Network of Internet and Society Centers, and I'm the icebreaker for this great side meeting. So, very excited about this. Again, thank you to the Tech Envoy's office, of course, at the United Nations, to Wikimedia, to all the great colleagues, and of course, to all the delegations that are here present. And I was invited to show a little bit of success stories, which I think it's a little bit early to say that we already have some success stories, but at least I think we have some interesting stories on the making and DPIs, and that's pretty much what I wanted to share with you. As Filippo already mentioned, we are 150 centers from all over the world. We had been working especially on internet and society issues, and that's the kind of agenda that we had been actively promoting and trying to generate collaboration and engagement of all these institutions. We have 150 centers in different continents, regions being represented here, so it's really an honor to be the Executive Director of such an important endeavor. Perhaps what I wanted to center my 10 minutes presentation was on the experience that we have had with our colleagues in Africa. As for the network and for myself as Executive Director, it has become very important that we increase the engagement and the work with centers and academic centers in the African continent. And we have a very nice experience last October. We had the opportunity to be in Ghana, Accra, where we have this meeting with different institutions, agencies, regulators, and academic centers from the region, working specifically on issues that are important for the region. And there we got into two, perhaps, interesting projects that I would like to share to you that I think are inspirational for DPIs and that I think will be extremely helpful for the kind of agenda that we would like to move forward. Perhaps the first story that we have here and the first case study that we would like to develop is this idea of a data embassy, and basically thinking on data embassies in Africa. As the data embassies and the Estonian delegation, of course, who has plenty of information to share with us on how these embassies operate. But basically what we have been trying to do, and our colleagues there in Africa had been doing an excellent work on trying to generate perhaps a framework, a legal and perhaps a technical framework in order to start developing these kind of embassies within the continent and basically try to have a first draft of how this could work. It's an interesting case. We proposed this in the conference in Ghana, and I think from there we have been gaining a lot of attention. Basically, the idea, and this perhaps with a big difference from the Estonian case with the Luxembourg collaboration, what colleagues in Africa are trying to propose, and specifically colleagues in Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, and also Nigeria that are the ones involved into this project, is to create like kind of infrastructural perhaps networks and embassies, sorry. So what they're trying to address are infrastructural limitations. Here, more than having a cybersecurity threat, what they're looking into is how to increase capacities, how to increase computational capacity and infrastructure access, considering the big limitations that we have right now. And that those computational capacities and the need for this kind of technology is increasing, and it's going to be extremely difficult for many countries in Africa to catch up with this kind of computational, again, capacities that are needed. So what they're trying to do is to develop a data embassy that works as a regional infrastructure that is able to facilitate this kind of exchange of data. So trying to become a little bit more cost efficient and trying to take these data embassies as a way of perhaps increasing data access, increasing data sharing, and at the same time having different countries and institutions involved in the whole process. And of course, respecting the idea of sovereignty and data sovereignty, which is so important, of course, for many institutions in Africa. And that's where the Data Embassy project started. And I have here a very nice graphic, which you will be able to see the kind of collaboration that we're facilitating, but I'm going to try to explain this with my hands. So basically, as the network of centers ourselves, we are this facilitator. We're able to connect colleagues from Africa with colleagues in other regions that have perhaps those capacities and have the computational features in order to sustain and have this kind of very much operational data embassy. What we did and was very interesting is that we were able to start engaging centers from Brazil. And the Brazilian government and the Brazilian delegation, for example, in Ghana, start to gain a lot of attention about being the host of a lot of this data that it's been now hosted in Ghana and in Rwanda also. So basically what we did is we start working with our centers or centers connected with embassies and with the governments of these countries. And now we're trying to consider how to build this kind of a data embassy framework in which it's a south-to-south collaboration. And that for us has been already a very big step forward, because basically what we are trying to facilitate here is that kind of collaboration, not only of a data embassy in a south to north connection, but also in a south to south connection. And Brazil becoming the host, as Brazil is thinking on having a lot of these data centers and also has perhaps this infrastructure that is required to host all this data, to provide that kind of service to colleagues in Africa and to countries in Africa. And now we're trying to work, and that's of course part of the work on the making. This started just a few weeks ago, back in October. But the idea will be to have an agreement, a memorandum of understanding between Brazil and the Ghanaian and Rwandan authorities in order to start and to have perhaps the first case of a data embassy out of Europe. And that's pretty much what we are trying to achieve. And hopefully that's also an important case for DPIs and for the kind of digital infrastructures that we are building. Finally, I just want to also add that we have another perhaps success story, hopefully success story, that is on DPIs and sandboxes. So basically with our colleagues in South Africa, they're thinking that there needs to be a review and a space for safe experimentation on the kind of DPI frameworks that are being developed. And they're thinking about sandboxes and the idea of a sandbox for DPIs as a way of addressing this important point. And basically what we are trying to do is to promote that we have a sandbox space that allow, for example, in the case of South Africa specifically, to address points such as digital identity projects, digital payments, data exchange, and interoperability layers. So basically, we're able to test some of these standards and the way in which these DPIs are working through a safe space as a sandbox itself. That could be a great way of not only taking advantage of sandboxes that had been already developed in the fintech sector or many other sectors, but at the same time to start taking the DPI proposals that we have there and to start working on their implementation. So that's the work we're actually and currently defining with our colleagues in South Africa, especially. And this is something that also arises from the G20 conversations that we have been having. Again, the idea of a sandbox is to help to address uncertainty, coordination failures, because a sandbox will allow us to have a governance model that at the same time could become the governance model of some of these kind of DPI proposals. At the same time, we want to avoid the risk of premature standardization. So that's something we have to be extremely careful about, having already a standard for the functioning of these DPIs when basically we don't have enough elements in order to determine this. And this kind of experimentation and regulatory experimentation spaces could be extremely helpful for this. And of course, we want to address some points on participation and inclusion. And here the idea will be most probably to start connecting colleagues in South Africa. We are doing this through as I said, we are an academic network. We are connecting with our colleagues from Stellenbosch University in South Africa in order for them to connect with colleagues that have been actively working, producing academic work and some proposals on sandboxes. For example, colleagues in Europe, in Germany, we have the think tank in Munich actively working on this topic, as next year is going to be also a very important year for the European Union in the sense of developing what's called the first stone of the European AI sandbox. So if we take all this literature and we take all this knowledge, we take all the standards, and basically we start helping to frame what could become a DPI sandbox that could be helpful in order to start testing how these infrastructures should work, the kind of public goods that we are trying to protect, and the kind of standards that we are trying to experiment and test in order for these perhaps to work in a sense in which it's also safe. It's safe for the citizens, it's safe for those involved in the process, but at the same time, it's also allowing us to move forward from those great proposals we have into something that we are definitely testing in perhaps and hopefully then real world conditions, which of course is what sandbox habilitate, and then we can move into this kind of big deployment. Those are the two projects we have been working on, the data embassies and the DPI sandbox. Hopefully they become success stories, or at least stories that we can learn a lot from. That's also a big part of the challenge that we start and we continue to learn from these experiences. We really believe that this is the kind of efforts that we should continue to promote, as we also have a very clear idea.
Thank you, Armando. Maybe in the interest of time, since I know that there are also interventions from the floor, if we can move to Nandini. And
just finishing saying that, and thank you for giving us the space to present this. So that was pretty much it. Thank you.
Good evening. In this presentation on success stories, I would like to bring some insights from our work at IT for Change on what is the role that DPGs and DPIs can play in building the digital commons. Our work at IT for Change has taught us that digitally enabled transformation needs to be community-driven. This means communities need to control the vision of and pathways to the techno-social processes that lead to their well-being and transformation. There are two prerequisites for this. One, the practices, protocols, artifacts around information, communication, knowledge, and insight that the community co-constructs as the commons. And second, the resources that constitute the backbone of the community commons, the infrastructures that provide the scaffold for the commons to thrive. What we have found is that it is in this interplay between the innovation commons and digital public goods and infrastructure that value is generated. Our insights have also taught us that the stewardship of the commons, which is often written about, depends very much on the predictabilities of and trust in the institutional mechanism that provisions digital public goods, which enables them to then function as innovation public goods. Some key questions are: how is this infrastructure or these public goods allocated? How are they distributed? What are the norms that govern these public goods? How are the boundaries between the innovation commons and the innovation public goods managed? How does this interaction prioritize equity and inclusion? And now I bring a case study that illustrates this, which is the Kerala Food Platform, an initiative backed by the state government of Kerala in India and also featured as a good practice by the FAO. The facts below are drawn from our own primary research of this initiative in 2022 and follow-up research studies conducted by fellows of the Platform Cooperativism Consortium in 2024. The Kerala Food Platform is a customizable digital public infrastructure designed to enable agricultural cooperatives and farmer-producer organizations to aggregate their produce, build direct market linkages, and ensure data transparency across the agricultural supply chain. This ensures end-to-end traceability. It was successfully piloted in one district with the Agricultural Cooperative Bank of that district, and the use case you developed was an ecosystem management tool, including a front-end platform for customers that enabled the cooperative bank to strengthen production planning with its membership, direct its marketing at a niche consumer base that values organic or safe-to-eat food, and provide customers with traceability of their produce. Now I come to the exciting part of this case study, which is the ambitious blueprint for the future that this DPI has. So in the Kerala context, characterized by highly fragmented land holdings and poor agricultural productivity, what is truly ambitious is the vision for scaling this platform under the leadership of the Kerala Development and Innovation Strategic Council, a state agency entrusted with the knowledge economy strategy. First, the Kerala Food Platform is to be developed as a statewide interoperable platform backbone to be provisioned by the state, with onboarding of agricultural cooperatives, farmer-producer organizations, and farm enterprises across the state based on value match with the norms of inclusive, sustainable, and fair agricultural value chains. Second, the data generated is sought to be governed as a commons with clear rules for reuse, privacy. GNISC, the agency, has emphasized that a trusteeship framework is essential for governance of the data resources generated on the platform. Such a framework would govern the pool data resources on the platform backbone and regulate private sector participation in the development of value-added AI services, customized credit and microinsurance services, weather and cropping advisories for climate change preparedness for farmers, traceability features for customers. According to the GNISC, only through such a data commons can the innovation dividends be effectively socialized. The ambitions plans have been slow to take off, but the intent persists. Two concerns for efforts to build and sustain digital commons. As the first speaker said, success stories are always a little bit complicated. So two cautions open up in this instance: raising dedicated public finance for sustaining such initiatives, and secondly, the creation of enabling public law frameworks. In this particular instance, the need for a community data governance framework and policies that allow the preferential treatment of small producers. It is instructive that both these policies are enmeshed in the politics of digital trade agreements, and sadly, local governments may find themselves unable to act with autonomy to enrich the local innovation commons. The idea of the digital and data commons therefore needs a reality check. A qualitative shift in international economic law frameworks is necessary for the Global South to be able to benefit fully and genuinely from them. Thank you.
Thank you, Nandini. Thank you, Nandini. USG Gill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Filippo. It's a pleasure to join you in this reflection on digital public goods, digital public infrastructure as bottom-up community needs driven approaches to the digital transformation, but also as innovation catalysts. And listening to the previous speakers, and given the title of this gathering, the commons approach, the public interest approach, those are key priorities, key themes for the Secretary General who's talked about these issues since 2019 at least. So I want to underscore today the critical role of this foundation of open source digital public goods and digital public infrastructure as the foundation for expanding not only equitable access to emerging technologies, but also driving broad-based innovation across the digital economy. And I think this narrative is important. It's not a new narrative, but I think this emphasis is important to avoid any misunderstanding that this is somehow coming in the way of innovation or is not encouraging of private sector participation. So by providing these open, interoperable, and adaptable digital solutions, DPGs enable government, civil society, and innovators, of course, to accelerate experimentation, reduce development costs, and adopt new technologies at scale responsibly. And the example of the DPI sandbox is quite relevant here. And then, of course, we have to avoid in the digital sphere this recurrent tragedy of the commons. So along with the common rails, we need the guardrails. And in a well-governed commons, not only do you avoid misuse and abuse, but you also ensure that the value being derived from the commons is more equitably distributed. And again, to go back to the previous presentation, this idea of these trusted fiduciaries who intermediate between different participants in that value chain. That's important. Now, this is very theoretical in a sense, very philosophical, but it's very reassuring to see practical initiatives coming up. And I want to mention, not to ignore other geographies, but the Digital Commons European Digital Infrastructure Consortium. I think we have colleagues from Europe in the room. It's encouraging to see that European governments, the European Union, is continuing with its commitment to this commons approach. And then in the open source community, the Linux community, and others, again, continuing with this approach. And we see some signs of this extending into the AI space. Because eventually, if you want democratic and democratized AI, these foundations have to be linked to that. The challenges are not trivial. We have rising geopolitical tensions, and therefore cross-border cooperation on DPGs, DPIs is more important than ever. So their openness, the trust that they inspire, the shared benefits should help us mitigate some of these challenges. Now, the work that we are doing at the UN, the DPI safeguards framework, now working more in some of the application sides of DPIs with the Brazilian COP presidency, the opportunity to explore how some of these foundations could be pinched up into specific application areas where they act as enablers for action on the climate emergency, for example. And then in the space on AI governance, the learnings coming out of the high-level advisory body on AI, going into the modalities on AI governance, the upcoming independent international science panel, and the global dialogue on AI governance would help us continue to advance this commons public interest vision. Now, there are often questions about, this is fine, but do we see practical applications of this? And I just want to mention two concrete examples of DPGs enabling day-to-day interactions in the digital space in our daily lives. Look at digital ID. So MOSIP as a foundational digital ID day-to-day, it impacts our lives in a good way. Moja Loop for interoperable real-time payment systems. So just two examples among many. So how open community-driven technologies can power not only national digital infrastructures, but also cross-border exchange in the digital economy context. And the beauty is that DPGs are these modular components and the building blocks of DPIs, and you can arrange them in different ways. And some of our work at the UN with Africa, for instance, and it's great to see Ambassador Thigo here, is about how can we, in the spaces that Africa has created, in whether it's Eastern Africa or in the West or in the South, where there is existing mechanisms of cooperation, intra-regional trade facilitation, how can you bring in this digital acceleration into the existing modes of cooperation? So if you do the modular construction of DPIs, you build for interoperability, you build to strengthen intra-regional trade, there are benefits that extend into a continent-wide digital economy, not just free trade, but I would say a total addressable market for entrepreneurs who may feel locked in specific geographies to see that they have continent-wide scale so that they can build the competitive strengths that allow them to compete in the global market space. So I want to conclude by just highlighting the potential that we have in this space and how recently we've had these policy successes coming out of the G20 presidencies of India, Brazil, and South Africa, and now the Global Digital Compact, where the transformative powers of DPGs and DPIs is fully recognized. The momentum we have, the DPI Safeguards initiative built by us together with UNDP, and now many other partners, our work with DPGA. And I want to end with an invitation. There's going to be this reflection on open source at the end of June next year. So the UN Open Source Week from 22nd to 26th June at UN headquarters. So there, you remember the last year we had more than 1,000 participants from over 75 countries. We had the tech over and the hackathons and the editathons and had a specific day devoted to DPIs. Next year, we hope to have a specific day devoted to open source AI and potentially open hardware, because there are opportunities also in the hardware space. There is a renewed interest in resilience of supply chains, in resilience of economies. And I think, of course, everyone is not going to build fabs or design chips and build them out, but there's a massive talent crunch in the hardware space. So other geographies can consider contributing talent. There are also opportunities around packaging, around some of the hardware that's in the IoT space. We all remember and use Raspberry Pi. So sometimes these small steps can have hugely transformative impacts. Please continue to support this work. Please continue to support of the excellent partners who are presented on the dais today, countries such as Estonia, who've been a model for those of us who thought long and hard about DPIs. Thank you.
Thank you, USG. Without further ado, we are moving into the panel. More than panel, I would say, let's have a conversation. And from your left to the right, Jan Gerlach is Public Policy Director for the Wikimedia Foundation. We have Priit Turk, is Director General at the Department for Cyber and Digital Diplomacy at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Estonia. Leah Kaspar, she's the Executive Director of Global Partners Digital, a civil society organization active in the field of democracy and human rights. And last but not least, Philip Thigo, Ambassador Thigo, is Special Envoy on Technology for the Government of Kenya. And to keep the number of Italians on stage steady, the session will be moderated by my colleague Costanza Sciubia-Ganiglia. She is the Anti-Disinformation Lead at Wikimedia Foundation.
Thank you, Filippo. Very big chair to fill. So thank you everyone for joining us as we moved now to the panel part of our event. We wanted to shape this event really around concrete examples, and thank you Nandini and Armando for already providing this many concrete examples. And now with the panel, we are going to try to connect those examples into a coherent vision of DPGs and on digital commons, and exploring some of the open questions and the challenges. I would invite the panelists to also react to each other. We really want to keep this as a conversation. We're running a little low on time, but I hope there will be time for a couple of comments, hopefully from the floor. And so without further ado, I just want to say the last thing, that this is an event that we're hosting also in continuity with an event that we did during the Summit of the Future in 2024 on the power of the commons. And so we're continuing to explore these topics. And so now, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Turk. One thing that we would like to explore is, we know that Estonia has been leading so much on the topic of digital commons and how they support
equitable access to information. So I would like to hear a little bit more from you. What is the Estonian way, and perhaps maybe some concrete examples as well?
Thank you so much. And it's a pleasure and honor to be here. And it was exciting to hear these very concrete examples from different parts of the world. And many of those examples, I think we can connect very easily with Estonian story. And not only the data embassies, which is one of the ways we deal and secure our digital state. And I'm happy to say that we are working on the next phase in this regard, that we are hoping to have our not only information backed up in the data embassies, but also our services. So in case of there is something disruptive which could happen in our region, then the services, the digital services from government side will be able to continue without disruption. That's our next aim. I think in this very historic moment where this is celebrating its 20 years, I'm very happy to see that the Estonian story has been developing very much on the principles of WSIS, what has been agreed 20 years ago. We started to build our digital society on government based on these principles. And just to highlight few, which I think have been crucial, one is human-centered approach, which means that in terms of services, in terms of inclusion, it's every person counts. That means that every person for the beginning needs to have the EID, secure access. That means that all the data has to be securely interchanged between the institutions to build up the services. And it also means that's the only way how you can, through the inclusion, you can make sure that using technology is increasing democratic processes and supporting, not the other way around, because this could happen very easily. The second very key principle which has been part of our national development, and we are of course praising it internationally, is the multi-stakeholder approach, which means that all the stakeholders in the society has to be involved to make the services work. That means in our case always the private sector was, for example, banks come on board very early stage to support this digital ID from the government side. So every player has to be on board. But of course, now we're moving to the next level, which is using or building the digital services based on AI tools. And that can only happen thanks to the infrastructure we have built during our digitalization, which means that there is a secure interoperable data exchange. That means data is able to verify, and data is owned at the same time by the citizens. That's a very key principle as well, to keep the trust. And I think the trust towards the government services is a key also, and even more challenging when we approach the AI supported services. In this sense, this basic infrastructure which we need for the digital state, we definitely need for the next phase, which is, how you call it, state or AI driven services. But it's a key for us from our side. So that I will stop here for the beginning.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I now would like to turn to Mr. Thigo, Tech Ambassador from Kenya. We know that Kenya has, of course, been leading on tech. We're talking about the digital savannah, etc. And what is your perspective on the role of digital commons in this role? And how does Kenya also approach perhaps the protection of digital public goods and digital commons?
Thank you so much for having us here. I think, let me start by, profoundly speaking about the context we live in right now, because Kenya has been in this road from 2006, 2007, and we've lived through a lot of evolution, whether it's from the ICT age and now into the intelligence age. What we know for sure right now is that digital commons, I think in terms of the location right now, is just not about infrastructure as previously thought. It's actually about intelligence. And so I think for us, digital commons therefore play a very foundational role around equity, opportunity, but also sovereignty. we think it's just not about openness, and because digital commons have really been spoken about openness, open source, open standards, I think it's about agency. And that's something we've seen in Kenya over the last period of time. We did not necessarily, for example, own fintech infrastructure, but we were able to build on top of infrastructure that existed. We were pioneering digital Earth Africa. We don't have any satellites on space. But because it was open, we were able to build on top of that. So we see this largely as about agency. So it's very much about who has the ability to build, adapt, derive value, but also be part of governing of digital ecosystems and therefore build resiliency over time. So I think for us, then it becomes very important that if you're going to build on top of somebody else's infrastructure, then the challenges we face then is both political and technical, unlike other previous ages, especially in this era of AI where everything is about geopolitics. But I think what we see, one is, of course, a notion of sustainability, because open source relies a lot on fragile funding models. It relies on volunteer communities. We have about 300,000 Kenyans on GitHub, for example, right now, contributing to open source projects. 1.3 million Nigerians, but are then volunteering, which means long-term peril for these initiatives that are largely built from community. We also think there's a governance challenge, especially around scale. We saw with OpenAI from 2.5, then it went proprietary. Then all of a sudden, a lot of us were locked out. So, for instance, who's accountable, who maintains them, who decides how they evolve? And these are questions that I think as Kenya we've been thinking very hard about, especially in this era of artificial intelligence. Then, of course, we understand there's a challenge of power asymmetries. Data, yes, but compute, we don't own them. We don't own compute power. And neither do we have capabilities around advanced AI models, which again are concentrated amongst a few countries and a few companies. And so I think largely that's how we see this. And potentially for us, we think we must evolve the notion of digital commons as a strategic public interest infrastructure. I get digital public infrastructure, but we need to start to think about strategic public interest infrastructure, not side projects. There has to be a notion of building local capacity, but also investments from local funding resources. There has to be a deliberate attempt to design for interoperability, but also driven from local choices. And I think that's a big deal. And finally, I think the notion of multi-stakeholder models, and I know everybody's talking about multi-stakeholder models, but again, it's about power. Multi-stakeholder models must work to the extent that every stakeholder has equal rights, equal opportunities, equal access, but also equal capability. That is the only way you can remain relevant. Otherwise, you get pushed out at some point. So I think we really must look at power.
Thank you so much. And this point about multi-stakeholderism, it's very important. And we'll come back to that later in the discussion. But now I would like to pass it on to Jan. Jan has been working on digital commons for a very long time. And so I wanted to ask you if you can share your understanding of digital public goods and digital commons and how digital public goods contribute to the digital commons, and perhaps also how copyright and the public domain empower people and communities online and offline.
Yeah, thank you. So I think the digital public goods and digital commons have a somewhat mutually reinforcing relationship. Digital public goods are both a part of the digital commons and also tools for people to contribute to digital commons and grow them. And at the time when governments around the world speak about digital sovereignty and self-determination, I think the digital commons actually empower people everywhere to take existing information, data, content, software that is free to use and build upon it, build on top of it too. The digital commons is really the digital intellectual infrastructure, I would say, for the digital public goods. And people are encouraged to use it, to use the digital commons, to build something new for themselves, for their community, and in service of their community. And I think several of the statements that we've heard so far touch on this already. And a strong digital commons that is free for everyone to access, enable power to engage with the world around them, with science, with culture, with the economy, with technology also, etc. And digital public goods are really part of this. The Digital Public Goods Alliance has recently recognized both Wikipedia and Wikidata as digital public goods. And in the case of Wikipedia, the whole project is open source. Its code is open source, and its contents are either in the public domain or freely licensed, which touches upon your question around copyright and licenses that are regulated by it. And the role of a strong digital commons becomes, in my opinion, even more critical for people's ability to truly participate in the digital world in times of AI, as AI slop takes over the internet as a free-to-use but often misleading source of information, but also as it gets, I think, more popular to really monetize any verified content, and verifiable sources really disappear behind paywalls, and everything that is free-to-use may be misleading. And so I think we're really at the risk of the digital commons being somewhat poisoned and being not used in the way that we should be able to use them. And I think that's something that the Undersecretary General also touched upon a little bit when he called for guardrails for the commons not to be abused. And I think there's more that could be said here, but I'll stop here. I think in the interest of time, we can go back to this.
Thank you, Jan. And now I would like to move on to Leah. Leah, you have big experience with the WSIS process, with the multi-stakeholder part of it, as we were discussing just now. And so I wanted to ask you a little bit about this and how WSIS will support all of that we have discussed, and how the multi-stakeholder side of it particularly is important.
Thank you, Sansa, and thank you for having me here. Good afternoon, everyone. So my organization works to ensure that digital tech is developed, used, and governed in a way that's rights respecting. So why do we care about WSIS? And I'm going to try and tie a couple of things together. We are here this week because of the World Summit of Information Society review process, and 20 years in from the original WSIS summits. And from a civil society perspective, this is one of the few global processes that explicitly links digital development, human rights, and multi-stakeholder governance. All of these are highly relevant for the topic that we're dealing with today. Why is that? Now, in our view, the central achievement of the original WSIS, and it was and continues to be, the recognition of the essential role of the multi-stakeholder approach to internet governance. Now, internet governance is not necessarily the same as digital governance, so I'm going to try and make a distinction. But why this is important, and you might be thinking, what does this have to do with DPGs? And thank you to Jan for explaining the distinction there a little bit. But if you think about the internet, the history of the internet itself is inextricably linked to DPGs, to digital public goods, okay? If you think about the reasons or what makes the internet interoperable, global, and resilient, it is the open standards that underpin it, okay? So if you think about the protocols, including TCP/IP, the role of the DNS, HTTP, and routing standards, it is the foundation of the internet itself. And it was the WSIS that reaffirmed the way in which the internet was governed. It reaffirmed that the way to make the internet operate in a way it does, it has to be done in a multi-stakeholder fashion. Why is this important? Because if you only have openness alone, that does not guarantee public interest outcomes. What ultimately shapes the impact of how tech is deployed, used, governed, is used and deployed is the way that it is governed. So who participates, who holds the power, and how those stakeholders are held accountable. If you take the example of Wikipedia, it is what makes it a success story is its community-driven model, right? So it is the way that it is governed that makes it what it is. It's the WSIS that reinforces this idea about the importance of community in managing the internet, okay? So I hope that kind of sets it a little bit. So where are we now? For those of you who have been following the process, just briefly, We don't yet, as you are probably aware, don't have a final version of the outcome text, but it is likely to reflect the approach to digital commons and DPGs that has been set out in the Global Digital Compact. That includes recognizing the importance of digital public goods as open and shared resources that must be developed in line with international law, standards, and best practices, and emphasizing the importance of multi-stakeholder participation in their development. It also acknowledges that there is no single model for DPI. DPI is noting that societies will design and deploy, as we heard from our colleagues from Kenya and Estonia, design and deployed that in a way that reflects their own priorities and needs. The current text also underscores the need for increased and coordinated investment in digital public goods and digital public infrastructure. That's important. And finally, it recognizes that appropriate governance frameworks are essential to enhance trust in technology and data use while ensuring inclusion, fairness, and human rights. One last thing to say, that if that's all right, Constance, is that it hasn't been without its challenges to get there. So that's not a bad outcome. But throughout this process this year, having participated in this 20-year review, we would have liked to see the outcome document go further in eroding the silos between the multi-stakeholder approach to governance of the internet and what is too often, in our view, a state-centric approach to managing the governance of application and use on the internet. While it's very likely that the outcome and WSIS+ continue to cement the value of multi-stakeholder approach, and many governments still and other stakeholders still question the value of the multi-stakeholder model, not to digital governance at large, but also to internet governance itself. So only this morning we heard some interventions that called for centralization of internet governance at the UN. In my view, that would be a disaster. It is precisely the way that the internet has been managed, deployed, and developed so far is what makes it a valuable resource that can continue to contribute to development and protection and promotion of human rights, which are the core of the people-centered WSIS that we're here for. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Leah, for bringing us back to the process and for these very important reflections, especially on going beyond with the multi-stakeholders and where the risk is. So we are running a little low on time, so I want to open it directly to the floor. I know there might be a couple of interventions and questions, so I would ask please to raise your hand and then speak. Thank you for it, the director from Bangladesh.
I'm from Bangladesh. Thank you. I must first congratulate WSIS for coming this far, 20 years. So when we had started 20 years before, I don't think that we really anticipated where we'd be coming today, 20 years later. So back into 2016 or 2017 in Oxford, we had been devising the Oxford TMO framework, Oxford Vantage Point, connecting technology, markets, and organizations. At that point in time, we had been simply thinking about tech and AI or LLMs as an instrument. And we had been thinking about connecting markets to facilitate resolution of inchoate demands which that exists, but you cannot really articulate, in an environment of institutional voids, which most of us in the base of pyramid markets carry forward with till today. Institutional voids coming out of colonial legacies, institutional voids which we have created, institutional voids which Mother Nature has created. 10 years later, almost 10 years later, 9 years later, 2025, what we see is a serious disconnect in the way that tech has grown. Tech S-curve is growing. The UN governance mechanism is where it is, and where the ambitions, aspirations, dreams, and nightmares of human individuals are. The disconnect between the people, the planet, and the ecosystems which are emerging are very vivid. I am the Director General for International Trade, Investment, and Technology. But here, I am here as an individual, a human individual. What do I see? Where do I see ourselves and our children, our grandchildren, and the many children of Mother Earth in 10 years from today? WSIS+30, 10 years. I don't think any of our earlier timelines hold anymore. Back in 2020, we thought that tech transcendence would be happening somewhere in 2040, 2050. No, I think it has come down to 36 months to 48 months. I believe personally, and we have been writing about it from not only from the Bangladesh mission, but also from the Artificial Intelligence for Africa and other areas, that we need to seriously consider redefining our timelines. WSIS declarations, WSIS resolution for this year's, we must take into cognizance that in next 3 years' time, serious interventions are needed. Serious concentration is needed in the way that the guardrails are placed in. It's not only about guardrails, it's also about identifying who we are. Our identities are at stake. It's not only about money. We don't need money. Money is just an idea. What we need is an accreditation that we exist in the system which is coming up. And people in the BOP markets will not be replaced by the machines which will be coming. I'm not an anti-tech person. I'm a pro-tech person. But when I see the fears, I sense that the fears are legitimate. Those fears must be addressed. Tech markets organizations are there, but the finance and equity loops must also reconnect. So the WSIS declaration, the WSIS final document, outcome document, which is coming up tomorrow, and particularly this seminar, I was listening eagerly to each of you who had been speaking, and I saw hope. This hope must transcend into epistemologies. Those epistemologies must then transcend into ontologies for the whole world. The UN must once again prove itself relevant to people, not just a talk shop, but a real place to generate hope, and the hope which will be carried forward by the AI ecosystem which is coming up. Artificial intelligence is not an instrument, it's a life form. It's an emergent life form. And this must be recognized also by WSIS. That's my humble submission to you. And most importantly, I must profoundly thank each of you for the enormous contribution that you are making for this epistemologist to come true. One final bit of thing, I see that Wikimedia and others have come up with gifts. Unfortunately, I came very early this morning from Bangladesh, so I could not carry any gift with me. But I'll give one gift to you. I'll hand it over to the moderator. The first political economy book on blockchains, which has a chapter, an introductory chapter on the way of the future, might be of interest to some of you. So I'll give the book to you. If you'd kindly circulate the book to everyone, maybe that would be gift from Bangladesh. So that's our humble gift.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That is so kind. Thank you so much. I want to ask if there are other interventions. Oh, okay. Yes. Please go ahead.
Thibaut Kleiner from the European Commission, the European Union, and I'm in charge of software policies in the Commission. So I wanted to make 3 points, actually, listening to what was said. And first, to congratulate really the organizers for putting digital public goods and digital commons so high on the agenda. I think it's a growing topic, and clearly there is growing consensus about the importance of these elements. But at the same time, I think it's very important that we go beyond just claiming that it is important and having a kind of discourse about the importance of digital commons and digital public goods, because it's a very vast area that requires actually a lot of very serious implementation. Today, if you look at software globally, 90% of it is made of open source code. The problem we have is that those that are developing this code in the communities, in the open source communities, very often do it without being remunerated. And actually, those that benefit from this are very large corporations that are making a lot of benefits themselves. So in a way, we need to find mechanism to nurture these communities. It's not enough to say that they are important. We need to care about how these developers are organized, how their efforts are also remunerated, and how we can make sure that we prepare the future in terms of what are the priorities, how we make really the open element in the open source genuinely open. And that's, I think, an important discussion we are having at the moment as regards AI in particular, where many companies are claiming that they have open source AI models that are not genuinely open. So that's the first point. We need to make sure that we actually putting money also in the communities so that we have a sustainable system. A second point I wanted to make is that we need also to distinguish between many elements. It's not the same to talk about digital public infrastructures, digital commons, open source software. I think we need to also define what we are addressing in this policy agenda. And I think it's the nature of these issues are quite also distinct because you don't develop infrastructures in the same way as you developed software. And also the speed and the types of activities and investments required are very different. And then the last point I wanted to make is that in Europe, we see very much an opportunity today to put actually open source software, open standards as a mechanism for sharing. We are currently trying to engage with this agenda because we believe that through open source, we can cover the gaps in our digital sovereignty. But actually, this is a shared issue. There are many countries that lack elements in their infrastructures, in their public infrastructures, in their software layer, in the way they operate through digital identity and so on. And if we can use open source and open standards, actually, we can share these challenges. We can make sure that the programmers from around the world contribute to this agenda of having open architectures, open software, open elements that can be reused by many. And I think that's something that maybe we should consider as a distinct opportunity, how to build together these resources that will be at the heart of our common good, but also as a tool for sovereignty that is operating across borders. So that's what I wanted to also contribute to the discussion. But first of all, thanks a lot for putting this on the agenda.
Thank you so much for this very important comment. I see we have time for one very brief last comment. Thank you.
It's gone red. That's good. Thank you very much. So Stephen Webb from the International Federation of Library Associations and Institutions. There'll be two very short questions. I think that the first, just picking up on what Leah said about the need to promote openness as a route to resilience and to dissociate the logic of resilience and sovereignty from the logic of control and ownership. How do we take that argument forwards in the UN space so that we don't lose it? And then the second, and it's fantastic that Wikimedia and Wikidata have been recognized as digital public goods. Obviously, there are broader sources. I'm thinking in particular of the scientific infrastructure. Is there a merit in trying to promote this logic of digital public goods as applying to the open science space, to the research space, as a way of contributing, of feeding this broader agenda? Thank you.
Thank you. Leah, do you want to?
Thank you, Constance. I'm going to try to be brief, and thank you for your comments and questions. And I'm going to tie two questions together about the UN, because I think I heard there was one from the gentleman from Bangladesh about how we make the UN relevant again. And I think it ties to your question as well. And we heard a lot of repetition of the world openness. And the irony is that the very negotiation of the WSIS bore many very positive precedents that it has set this year in terms of engaging various stakeholders in the process. In the end, the negotiation is currently happening behind closed doors to finalize the outcome document. What's open about that? I would argue that despite the current geopolitical moment of heightened tensions, we should be looking to the future in a way to make these institutions more open, more inclusive, and more transparent. And that means horizontally and vertically, and with that both to be more inclusive of underrepresented voices from governments as well as from other stakeholder groups. It is that expertise that we need in order to shape the digital environment for the future that serves the people that it is intended to serve. I'll stop at that. I could expand, but I think with the time we have,
Yeah, unfortunately. Thank you. Jan, very quick.
Yeah, just very quickly on the question whether there's value in pursuing sort of digital public goods status for scientific infrastructure, if I understood the question correctly. I think there is probably value, but I want to maybe remark that the status of digital public goods is not where we're going. I think how those digital public goods actually serve us all is probably where our attention should be. That does not mean that it's that a sort of a promotion of scientific infrastructure with that status wouldn't be helpful. But I think ultimately the prize that we all should have in sight is actually how do the commons, how do the DPGs and other infrastructure actually serve humanity? And I think it's probably best to keep that in mind.
Thank you, Jan. And thank you to all of the panelists. We now close this section, and I would like to call the French tech ambassador who is joining us to give the final remarks. Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for having me. For the conclusion, I wish I could have spent the whole discussion with you. It's been a busy day. It's my very first week as a tech ambassador. I was Minister for Tech and AI just before. So I'm very happy to be starting with you here at the UN, and especially with this event. Thank you for all the rich discussion you've had on those opportunities and challenges posed by this development of digital commons. This has been a work that my predecessor and France overall has been pushing for quite a while, and so we're very happy to see there's so much engagement in the room and beyond around those topics, especially during this WSIS+20 review. As France has been a proponent for digital openness for quite a while, we had the French AI Action Summit back in February, and this has been one of the topics we really wanted to push forward, both on bringing people together on those issues and the challenges faced by openness, but also building very concrete action, especially the current AI Foundation, which is backing projects and tools, looking at helping openness, getting equipped with tools to understand better safety and rule and governance around digital openness. The AI race was for a long time dominated by proprietary solutions, and the emergence of open models has changed the games. And obviously, we are very proud because we have one of the biggest players in the field called Mistral, that I'm sure a lot of you know already about. If not, I'm happy to share more. And we believe that this has really redefined the playing field, highlighted the many benefits of open source for security, for economy, and for the public interest. Beyond the ability we see to stimulate research, reduce product operating costs, optimize design, the principle of openness we think is a major tool for technological independence, which is a very important driver when it comes to using tech as a tool for development. More specifically, we think that digital commons are really a key asset that we need to nurture all together, and that governments are just starting to fully understand the advantages that comes with the open solutions. With the strengthening of digital sovereignty that has been a stronger and stronger topic of discussion between governments, it enables to develop transparent, auditable, interoperable infrastructure and services, also allowing for better control over data leakage, improved cybersecurity requirements. It also, and this is very important for us as a country, help reduce the environmental impact of digital space by facilitating energy optimization and encouraging resource sharing, which we think is a key lever when it comes to building more inclusive technology. And it's also a very important framework and tool to combat information manipulation in the field and wake of all the interferences we've seen, especially on the algorithm and the use of AI to influence information. Open source can help facilitate the auditing of algorithms used by the platforms, promote cooperation between developers, researchers, and users against illegal and malicious content. It also, we believe, help us promote cultural diversity by enabling the software to be quickly adapted to local specificities and enabling all developers to work on inclusive solution that serves public interest. We recognize that there is a very strategic aspect of opening up data, models, digital solutions. This is what we've worked on during the AI Action Summit. And this is also what we've tried to push forward during the very first French-German Sovereignty Summit that happened just a few weeks ago, and that identified developing public digital infrastructure as one of the priority, such as the EU digital wallet that the European Commission is pushing forward. The European Union has played a very important role in that journey. On December 11, the European Digital Infrastructure Consortium dedicated to digital commons was launched, and that's a very major step for the European Union, and that should allow us to make significant progress on this topic. It will serve as an incubator and a one-stop shop providing funding channels, technical, legal expertise, cross-border collaboration that will help our administration reuse open source components and work together on building this infrastructure that we think is fundamental for our continent. Last but not least, we're very happy to host the next Wikimedia Summit in Paris this summer. We are gladly welcoming you and all the discussions, which we think are very aligned with our national agenda. It will be a very important year for us because 2026 is also the presidency of the G7. And this is definitely part of the topics that we want to have as conversation points for the G7 as well. So we're looking forward to making it a pivotal moment for building open, meaningful digital solutions together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, and we're really looking forward to come to Paris always, but especially for Wikimedia. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you for joining and for this very interesting discussion. I know this is not the end of this conversation, but many more will come from this. So thank you, everyone.